Have you ever walked into a room and felt invisible? Where people looked right through you, made assumptions about who you were before you even opened your mouth? Where your resume meant nothing because someone decided your worth based on how you looked, how old you seemed, or simply because you were new? Now imagine carrying a secret so powerful that when revealed, it would shatter every assumption, silence every doubt, and force everyone in that room to see you for who you truly are. This is a story about underestimation, about judgment, about the moment when truth becomes impossible to ignore. It's about a woman who walked into a room full of skeptics, endured their dismissal, and then revealed something that made them wish they had shown her respect from the very first moment. Because sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one everyone should have been listening to all along. The morning sun cast long shadows across the military base as Sarah Martinez stepped out of the cab. She adjusted the plain black backpack on her shoulder and took a deep breath of the crisp autumn air. Fort Harrison looked exactly like every other base she had been to over the years, yet each new arrival always carried its own weight. This time felt different, though. This time, she was starting fresh in a place where nobody knew her name or her story. The base was already alive with activity. Soldiers jogged past in formation, their boots hitting the pavement in perfect rhythm. A group of officers stood near the main building, deep in conversation. Sarah noticed how their eyes briefly flickered toward her, then away, dismissing her as quickly as they had noticed her. She was used to it by now. At 32 years old, Sarah knew she looked younger than her age. Her petite frame standing at just 5 feet 3 inches, and her soft features often led people to underestimate her. Today, dressed in casual civilian clothes with her dark hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, she looked like any other new recruit arriving for the first day of training. That was exactly what she needed them to think. The reception building was buzzing with activity. Behind the desk sat a sergeant who barely looked up from his computer screen as Sarah approached. His name tag read, Sergeant Morrison, and his expression suggested he had already processed dozens of new arrivals that morning and was thoroughly tired of it. Name? He asked, his fingers hovering over the keyboard. Sarah Martinez, she replied. He typed without looking at her, his eyes scanning the screen with practiced efficiency. You're here for the training program? I'm here for the joint operations meeting, Sarah corrected gently. Sergeant Morrison finally looked up, his eyebrows raising slightly. He glanced at her civilian clothes, her young face, her casual demeanor. The joint operations meeting is for senior officers and specialists. Are you sure you're in the right place? Sarah smiled patiently. She had expected this. I'm sure. The meeting is scheduled for 900 hours in Conference Room A. The sergeant frowned and turned back to his computer, clicking through several screens. His frown deepened. I don't see your name on the list for that meeting. The training program orientation is in Building C. It's probably where you need to be. Could you check again? Sarah asked, maintaining her calm tone. I received confirmation last week. With an audible sigh, Sergeant Morrison picked up the phone and dialed a number. Yes, this is the front desk. I have her. Civilian here claiming she's supposed to be at the joint ops meeting. He paused, listening. Sarah Martinez. Another pause. His expression shifted from irritation to confusion. Oh, I see. Yes, I'll direct her there immediately. He hung up the phone and cleared his throat, though his tone remained dismissive. Conference Room A is on the second floor, left wing. You'll need this visitor badge. Sarah clipped the badge to her jacket and made her way through the building. The hallways were filled with personnel moving with purpose, and she drew more curious glances. A couple of lieutenants passed her, their conversation stopping mid-sentence as they noticed her heading toward the restricted wing. Conference Room A was behind a set of heavy double doors. Through the small window, Sarah could see the room was already half filled with military personnel. She recognized several faces from previous operations, though she doubted any of them would recognize her in her current appearance. She checked her watch. 8:45. 15 minutes early. Taking another deep breath, Sarah pushed open the door and stepped inside. The room fell into a momentary lull as heads turned toward her. It was a large conference space with a long table in the center, surrounded by leather chairs. Maps covered the walls, and multiple screens displayed various data and satellite images. Around the table sat colonels, majors, and senior specialists, all in uniform. They were clearly in the middle of discussing something important before her arrival interrupted them. "Can we help you?" asked a broad-shouldered colonel at the head of the table. His tone was polite but carried an undertone of confusion. His name tag identified him as Colonel James Hawthorne. "I'm here for the meeting," Sarah said, moving toward an empty chair near the middle of the table. A major with graying temples and a stern expression leaned forward. "This is a classified briefing for senior personnel." "I think you might be in the wrong room, young lady." "I'm in the right place," Sarah assured him, pulling out the chair and sitting down. She placed her backpack on the floor beside her and looked around the table with a calm, steady gaze. The officers exchanged glances. A few looked annoyed, others confused. One younger captain seemed amused by the situation, a small smirk playing at his lips. Colonel Hawthorne cleared his throat. "Miss, I'm going to need to see your credentials. This meeting involves sensitive information, and we can't have unauthorized personnel present." Sarah reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out her identification, sliding it across the table to the colonel. He picked it up, glanced at it briefly, and his expression froze. His eyes widened as he read more carefully, then looked up at Sarah, then back down at the ID. The color seemed to drain slightly from his face. "Is there a problem, Colonel?" asked the stern major, noticing Hawthorne's reaction. The colonel didn't respond immediately. He was still staring at the identification in his hand as if trying to make sense of what he was reading. The room had grown uncomfortably quiet, with all eyes now moving between Sarah and Colonel Hawthorne. "Colonel Hawthorne?" the major prompted again, more forcefully this time. Hawthorne slowly passed the identification to the major sitting beside him without a word. The major took it with a puzzled expression, looked down at it, and his reaction mirrored Hawthorne's exactly. His stern features softened into shock, and he immediately straightened in his chair. "I apologize," the major said quickly, his entire demeanor changing. "We weren't informed that you would be attending in civilian attire." The identification began making its way around the table, and with each person who read it, the atmosphere in the room shifted dramatically. The smirk disappeared from the young captain's face, replaced by wide-eyed disbelief. A female lieutenant colonel's jaw actually dropped. Whispers began circulating. Sarah sat quietly, her hands folded on the table, waiting. She had been through variations of this scene before, though it never got less awkward. She could see the thoughts racing through their minds, the rapid recalculations of their initial judgments. A lieutenant near the end of the table was the last to receive the ID. He looked at it, then at Sarah, then back at the ID again. "I don't understand," he said aloud, voicing what several others were clearly thinking. "How is this possible?" Before anyone could respond, the conference room door opened again, and a three-star general walked in. Everyone immediately stood at attention, chairs scraping against the floor. Everyone except Sarah, who remained seated, looking calmly toward the new arrival. General Robert Chen was a legend in military circles. He had served for over 30 years, led operations in multiple theaters, and was known for his no-nonsense approach and sharp strategic mind. He was also one of the few people in the room who knew exactly who Sarah was. "Good morning," General Chen said, his voice carrying authority that filled the entire space. His eyes scanned the room and settled on Sarah. A small smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "I see you've met our key consultant for this operation." The general moved to the head of the table and everyone sat back down, though the tension in the room remained thick. Sarah's identification was still being passed around to the few who hadn't seen it yet. "For those of you who haven't had the pleasure," General Chen continued, gesturing towards Sarah, "this is Sarah Martinez, and before any of you make further assumptions based on appearances, let me be very clear about who you're dealing with." He paused, letting his words sink in. Every eye in the room was locked on either him or Sarah. "What you're holding in your hands," the general said, nodding toward the identification still circulating the table, "shows her current civilian consulting credentials. What it doesn't show is her full background." Sarah served 12 years in active duty before transitioning to specialized consulting work. During her service, she completed 3 tours in hostile territories, led reconnaissance operations that saved countless lives, and received multiple commendations for valor and strategic excellence. The room was absolutely silent now. Sarah could see the realization dawning on faces around the table, the shame creeping into the expressions of those who had dismissed her so quickly. "She holds advanced degrees in international relations and strategic intelligence," General Chen continued. "She speaks 4 languages fluently. She has worked with NATO forces, trained anti-terrorism units, and has been personally requested for this operation by the Secretary of Defense himself. Colonel Hawthorne had recovered some of his composure, though his face was still flushed. General Chen, we had no idea. The briefing documents we received didn't include this level of detail about the consulting team. That was intentional, the general replied. Part of this operation requires assessing how personnel react to unconventional situations and unexpected variables. You've all just provided me with valuable data about your ability to look beyond surface assumptions. The rebuke was subtle but unmistakable. Several officers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Sarah finally spoke, her voice quiet but clear. I appreciate the general's introduction, but I'd like to address something directly. She looked around the table, making eye contact with each person. I know what you all saw when I walked in. A young woman in casual clothes, probably lost, definitely out of place. And your reactions were natural based on the context you had. But this is exactly why I'm here. She stood up, and despite her small stature, she commanded the room. The operation we're about to discuss involves infiltrating networks that rely on people making exactly those kinds of assumptions. The enemy we're facing doesn't expect threats from people who look like me, act like me, or present themselves the way I do. That's what makes the approach effective. Sarah moved to one of the wall screens and pulled up a detailed map with several marked locations. For the next 6 weeks, we'll be working together to plan and execute an operation that could dismantle a significant trafficking network operating across 3 countries. I've spent the last 18 months embedded in adjacent networks, gathering intelligence, building contacts, and creating the foundation for this mission. As she spoke, clicking through images and documents on the screen, the transformation in the room was palpable. The officers who had dismissed her minutes ago were now leaning forward, taking notes, fully engaged. Her expertise was undeniable, her knowledge comprehensive, and her presentation sharp and professional. The reason I'm dressed like this today, Sarah continued, is because in 48 hours, I'll be going back undercover. I need to maintain the persona I've built. I need people to underestimate me. I need to look like someone who doesn't belong in rooms like this. She turned back to face the group. But in this room, with all of you, I need something different. I need your trust, your cooperation, and your willingness to follow a strategy that might seem unconventional. Can I count on that? The response was immediate. Colonel Hawthorne stood up first, followed quickly by everyone else in the room. You have our complete support, he said, and the embarrassment in his voice was replaced by respect and determination. And our apologies for our initial reception. Sarah nodded, a slight smile crossing her face for the first time since entering the room. Apologies accepted. Now let's get to work. We have a lot to cover and time is not on our side. As everyone settled back into their seats and Sarah began the detailed briefing, the atmosphere had completely transformed. The young woman they had dismissed as a lost rookie was now clearly the person leading this operation, and every officer in that room knew they had just learned a valuable lesson about judgment and assumption. General Chen watched from his position at the head of the table, satisfied. He had seen this dynamic play out before with Sarah. She had a way of turning skepticism into respect, not through confrontation or anger, but through undeniable competence and quiet confidence. It was one of the many reasons she was so effective at her job. The meeting continued for the next 3 hours, with Sarah leading the discussion, answering technical questions, and outlining the operational framework. By the time they broke for lunch, every person in that room understood they were working with someone exceptional. Someone who had earned her place at that table through years of sacrifice, skill, and dedication. As the officers filed out for the break, several approached Sarah to introduce themselves properly and ask additional questions. The young captain who had smirked earlier waited until the others had left before approaching her. I owe you an apology, he said, extending his hand. Captain David Reeves. I made assumptions I had no right to make. We all make assumptions, Captain. The question is what we do when we realize we're wrong. You're still here, still listening, still learning. That's what matters. He nodded gratefully and left the room. Soon, only Sarah and General Chen remained. You handled that well, the general said, gathering his files. Though I have to admit, I never get tired of seeing their faces when they realize who you are. It never gets less awkward, sir. But you're right, it is an effective teaching moment. Ready for the next 48 hours, he asked, his tone growing more serious. Sarah's expression shifted, the weight of what lay ahead settling onto her shoulders. As ready as I'll ever be. Going back under is never easy, especially after being myself for a few hours. You've done this before. You'll do it again. And this time, you'll have a full team behind you who knows exactly what you're capable of.
That does help, Sarah admitted, even if the first impression was a bit rocky.
General Chen smiled. Sometimes the rocky first impressions are the ones that stick the most. Those officers will remember today, and they'll think twice before underestimating anyone again. That makes everyone safer in the long run. As Sarah packed up her materials and prepared to leave the conference room, she reflected on the morning's events. Yes, it had been uncomfortable. Yes, she had been dismissed and doubted, but she had also proven once again that appearances could be deceiving, that assumptions could be dangerous, and that real strength often came in unexpected packages. The next phase of her mission was about to begin, and this time she would have a team behind her who understood not to judge a book by its cover. In her line of work, that kind of understanding could mean the difference between success and failure, between life and death. Sarah Martinez walked out of Fort Harrison that afternoon the same way she had walked in, looking like just another young civilian. But now, inside those walls, in that conference room, her presence would be remembered and respected long after she was gone. The afternoon session proved even more intense than the morning. Sarah stood at the front of the conference room, surrounded by maps, intelligence reports, and photographs spread across every available surface. The officers who had once doubted her now hung on her every word, their notebooks filled with details of the operation she was describing. The trafficking network operates through a series of front businesses, Sarah explained, pointing to locations marked on the digital map. Import-export companies, shipping firms, even a few legitimate restaurants. They move people and contraband through these channels, hiding in plain sight. Major Patricia Williams, the only other woman in the room and someone who had been quietly observing Sarah all morning, spoke up. How did you manage to infiltrate without raising suspicion? These networks are notoriously closed to outsiders. Sarah appreciated the question. It showed Major Williams was thinking strategically, not just following along. I didn't infiltrate directly. That would have been impossible. Instead, I created an identity that made them come to me. She pulled up a photograph on the screen showing a young woman with dyed blonde hair, heavy makeup, and a very different style of dress. Several officers leaned forward, squinting at the image before realizing it was Sarah herself. For the past 18 months, I've been Elena Vasquez, a freelance translator and occasional courier for various businesses in the border region. I made myself useful to small-time operators, never asking questions, always reliable, always forgettable. Gradually, I got recommendations to bigger players. 3 months ago, I started working peripherally for the network we're targeting. Colonel Hawthorne was taking detailed notes. What's your current status with them? They trust me enough to use me regularly, but not enough to share operational details. I'm still seen as low-level help, which is exactly where I need to be. People talk freely around those they consider beneath them. Captain Reeves, who had apologized earlier, raised his hand slightly. What's the end game? How do we move from intelligence gathering to actual takedown without compromising your position or safety? Sarah appreciated that his concern seemed genuine. That's what we're building toward. In 3 weeks, there's a major shipment scheduled. Multiple cells will be coordinating, which means multiple targets in one operation. But we need perfect timing and absolute discretion. If they suspect anything, they'll scatter, and we'll lose months of work. General Chen, who had been listening quietly, interjected. Which is why everyone in this room has been selected carefully. Each of you has specific skills needed for this operation. Sarah can't do this alone, no matter how capable she is. Over the next hour, Sarah broke down the role each officer would play. Colonel Hawthorne would coordinate overall logistics from the base. Major Williams would lead the tactical response team. Captain Reeves, who specialized in cyber operations, would handle electronic surveillance and communications interception. Each person received detailed assignments based on their expertise. As the meeting concluded for the day, Sarah felt the exhaustion settling into her bones. Maintaining her cover identity was mentally draining, but so was stepping out of it to be herself. The constant switching between personas took a toll that few people understood. Martinez a word? General Chen called as the others filed out. Sarah gathered her materials and joined him at the head of the table. The general waited until the door closed behind the last officer before speaking. How are you really doing? He asked, his formal tone softening. And I want the truth, not the briefing room answer. Sarah sank into a chair, some of the carefully maintained composure slipping. Honestly, sir, I'm tired. Going back under in 2 days feels overwhelming. For a few hours today, I got to be myself, to use my real name, to be seen for who I actually am. And now I have to put Elena back on and forget Sarah exists. General Chen nodded, understanding evident in his eyes. I know it's not fair to ask this of you, but you're the only one who can make this work. Your work over the past 18 months has been extraordinary.
That doesn't make it easier,
Sarah said quietly.
Sometimes I worry I'll forget which one is real, me or Elena.
You're real, Sarah. Don't ever doubt that. Elena is just a role you play. Brilliantly, I might add, but she's not you. He paused. I pulled your personnel file before today's meeting. I wanted to review everything before seeing you again. Sarah looked up, curious. I'd forgotten some of the details, the general continued. Your mother was Mexican, your father was military. You grew up on bases around the world. You spoke Spanish at home, English at school, picked up Arabic and French during deployments. You enlisted at 18, against your father's wishes because he wanted you to go to college first. He forgave me eventually, Sarah said with a small smile, especially after I went back and got my degrees while serving. You were the youngest person in your unit to make sergeant. Recommended for officer training twice, turned it down both times. Your file says you preferred field work to command positions. I liked being where the action was, Sarah admitted. Still do, apparently. What your file doesn't fully capture is the toll this work takes. The psychological evaluation reports mention resilience and adaptability, but they don't talk about the loneliness of living a life for months at a time. They don't measure the cost of being underestimated and dismissed, even when you know it's necessary for the mission. No, they don't, Sarah agreed. But I knew what I was signing up for when I transitioned to this kind of work. Doesn't mean it's easy. The general was quiet for a moment. Today, when those officers dismissed you, I saw it in your face. It still hurts even though you expect it. Sarah was surprised by his perceptiveness. I'd hoped I hid it better. But I've known you long enough to read between the lines. He stood up, gathering his papers. I want you to know that what you're doing matters, Sarah. Lives will be saved because of this operation. Families will be reunited, and none of it would be possible without your sacrifice. That means a lot. One more thing, General Chen said as they headed for the door. Tomorrow's session, we're bringing in the tactical team for coordination planning. It's going to be a full day. But tomorrow night, there's a dinner for senior personnel. I'd like you to attend, as yourself. One more night where you don't have to be Elena. Sarah hesitated. Is that wise? The fewer people who see me as myself, the better for operational security. The people at that dinner will all be read into the operation by then, and you deserve one evening where you're recognized and respected. Consider it an order if that makes it easier to accept. Sarah smiled. In that case, I'll be there, General. That evening, Sarah checked into temporary quarters on the base. The small room was sparse but clean, with a bed, desk, and small bathroom. She sat on the bed and pulled out her phone, scrolling through her contacts. There were 2 lists, Sarah's contacts and Elena's contacts. She kept them meticulously separate. Under Sarah's contacts, she found her brother's number. Miguel was 3 years younger, an engineer living in California with his wife and 2 kids. They talked every few weeks. Though she could never tell him much about her work, she pressed the call button. Sarah? Miguel's voice came through immediately. Everything okay?
Yeah, everything's fine. Just wanted to hear your voice.
Where are you this time? Can't say specifically, but I'm safe. How are Maria and the kids? They talked for 20 minutes about normal life, about his son's soccer games and his daughter's school play. Sarah closed her eyes and let the normalcy of it wash over her. This was who she was. Underneath everything else, someone's sister, someone's aunt, someone who belonged to a family. You sound tired, sis, Miguel observed. Are they working you too hard? Just the usual, Sarah deflected. Nothing I can't handle. You always say that. But I worry about you, you know. When are you going to settle down? Maybe get a normal job where you don't disappear for months at a time? Sarah laughed softly. You sound like Dad used to. Maybe Dad had a point. Miguel's voice softened. I know you love what you do, and I'm proud of you, even though I don't fully understand it. Just promise me you're being careful. Always. I promise. After they hung up, Sarah lay back on the bed, staring at the ceiling. Miguel's questions echoed in her mind. When would she settle down? Would she ever have a normal life? The work was important, crucial even, but it came at a cost. Relationships were difficult when you couldn't talk about your real life. Dating was nearly impossible when half the time you were pretending to be someone else entirely. She thought about Elena, the persona she would inhabit again in 2 days. Elena was harder, more cynical, less educated. Elena had a backstory full of struggle and survival. Elena didn't have a brother who called to check on her or a family who loved her. Elena was alone, and that was by design. The next day brought a whirlwind of activity. The tactical team arrived, a dozen highly trained specialists who would execute the physical aspects of the raid when the time came. Sarah spent hours coordinating with them, walking through scenarios, identifying potential complications, and ensuring everyone understood the layout of the target locations. Major Williams pulled Sarah aside during a break. I wanted to thank you, she said, her voice low enough that others wouldn't hear. For what? Sarah asked, genuinely surprised. For how you handled yesterday. I've been in the military for 15 years, and I've lost count of how many times I've been underestimated or dismissed because I'm a woman. Watching you command that room, seeing those men realize how wrong they were about you, it was powerful. You didn't need to get angry or prove yourself through confrontation. You just showed them who you were through your competence. Sarah nodded, understanding. It's a delicate balance, isn't it? We have to be twice as good to be seen as half as capable. Exactly, Major Williams agreed. But you've mastered it. And I want you to know, when we go operational, my team has your back completely. We won't underestimate you, and we won't let you down. I appreciate that, Major. More than you know. That evening, Sarah dressed carefully for the dinner General Chen had invited her to attend. She chose a simple black dress, professional but elegant, and pulled her hair back in a neat bun. Looking at herself in the mirror, she saw Sarah Martinez, not Elena Vasquez. It was a strange feeling after so many months. Dinner was held in the officers' club, a wood-paneled room with long tables and military memorabilia on the walls. About 30 people were present, all senior personnel involved in various aspects of the operation. Sarah arrived slightly late, and as she entered, conversations paused momentarily. But this time, the looks weren't dismissive or confused. They were respectful, welcoming. General Chen spotted her and waved her over to a seat at the head table between himself and Colonel Hawthorne. As she sat down, the colonel greeted her warmly. Miss Martinez, I'm glad you could join us. I wanted to apologize again for yesterday's confusion. I've been thinking about it, and I realize we failed the fundamental test of leadership, looking beyond the surface to recognize talent and capability. Sarah appreciated his sincerity. Colonel, in your position, with the information you had, your reaction was understandable. What matters is how you responded once you had the full picture. You and your team have been professional and supportive. Throughout the dinner, Sarah found herself engaged in genuine conversations about strategy, past operations, and the challenges of modern intelligence work. People asked her thoughtful questions, listened to her answers, and treated her as a valued colleague. It was such a stark contrast to the initial reception that it almost felt surreal. Captain Reeves approached her table during dessert. Ms. Martinez, I was wondering if I could ask you something off the record? Of course, Captain. How do you do it? How do you maintain your composure when people look at you and see someone completely different from who you are? Today, I tried to imagine being in your shoes yesterday, walking into that room and being dismissed like that, and I don't think I could have handled it with the grace you showed. Sarah considered the question carefully. Honestly, Captain, it's not easy. It never is. But I learned early in my career that anger and defensiveness don't change minds. Competence does. Consistency does. When people underestimate you, you have two choices. You can be hurt and offended, which is valid but rarely productive, or you can use their underestimation as an advantage. An advantage? When people don't expect much from you, it's easy to exceed their expectations. And when you do, the impact is much stronger than if they'd expected greatness from the start. Their assumptions become your opportunity to prove them wrong in a way they'll never forget. Captain Reeves nodded slowly. That's a mature perspective. I'm not sure I could maintain it. You might surprise yourself, Sarah said with a smile. We're all capable of more than we think when the situation demands it. As the evening wound down, General Chen stood and called for everyone's attention. Before we conclude tonight, I want to say a few words about the operation we're undertaking and the people involved. This mission has been 18 months in the making, and if successful, it will save countless lives and disrupt a network that has caused immeasurable suffering. He gestured towards Sarah. At the center of this operation is someone who has sacrificed more than most of you realize. Sarah Martinez has spent the last year and a half living a lie, putting herself in danger daily, gathering intelligence piece by piece while maintaining a cover that requires her to be completely invisible. She has done this knowing that the moment she walks into a room as herself, she'll likely be doubted and underestimated. The room was completely silent, all eyes on Sarah, who felt her cheeks warming slightly. What happened yesterday morning was unfortunate, but in some ways necessary, the general continued. It reminded all of us that we judge too quickly, assume too readily, and sometimes fail to see the extraordinary people right in front of us. Sarah could have called us out, could have demanded respect from the first moment, but she didn't. She let her work speak for itself because that's what professionals do. General Chen raised his glass. To Sarah Martinez, and to the reminder that true strength comes in many forms, often the ones we least expect. Thank you for your service, your sacrifice, and your unwavering commitment to this mission. The room erupted in applause, and Sarah stood, acknowledging the recognition with a nod. As she looked around the room at faces that had transformed from skeptical to supportive in just 24 hours, she felt something shift inside her. The isolation she had felt for so long, the loneliness of living as Elena, felt less crushing. These people might not fully understand her world, but they understood enough to respect it. Later that night, alone in her quarters again, Sarah prepared for her return to the field. She laid out Elena's clothes, cheap jeans, a faded t-shirt, worn sneakers. Tomorrow she would dye her hair back to blonde, change her makeup, adjust her posture and speech patterns. By the time she left the base, Sarah Martinez would disappear again, and Elena Vasquez would emerge. But something was different now. For the first time in months, Sarah felt like she wasn't entirely alone in this. She had a team who knew who she really was, who respected her capabilities, and who would be watching her back. When she went back under, she would still be isolated and in danger, but she would no longer be invisible. Somewhere people knew her truth, valued her contribution, and were counting on her. That knowledge, small as it seemed, made all the difference. Sarah fell asleep that night feeling more prepared than she had in a long time, ready to step back into the shadows, but knowing that when the time came, she would step back into the light with a team that would never underestimate her again. Elena Vasquez walked into the dimly lit cafe 3 blocks from the border, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the dusty windows. She carried herself differently now, with the slightly hunched posture of someone who had learned to make themselves small to avoid attention. Sarah Martinez had disappeared completely, locked away in a compartment of her mind that she couldn't access while Elena was in control. The transformation back had been thorough. Standing in front of the mirror at a safe house, Sarah had watched Elena emerge piece by piece. The hair dye, the change in makeup, the different clothes, these were just the surface. The real change was deeper. The way she held her shoulders, the slight accent she affected, the guarded look in her eyes. Elena trusted no one, expected nothing, and survived by being useful and invisible. "Elena, finally!" called Marco from a corner table. He was one of the mid-level operators in the network, someone who used her regularly for translation work and occasional courier runs. "I have a job for you. Good money." Elena slid into the seat across from him, her expression neutral. "What kind of job?" "Translation work, like always. Some paperwork needs to be processed. Contracts translated from English to Spanish. Easy work for you." Marco slid a folder across the table. "But it needs to be done by tomorrow. Can you handle that?" Elena thumbed through the papers, her eyes scanning quickly. These weren't ordinary business contracts. They were shipping manifests, customs documents, the kind of paperwork that would allow the network to move their operation forward. This was exactly the kind of intelligence Sarah had been gathering for months. "Tomorrow is tight, but I can do it," Elena said, her voice flat. "Same rate as last time?" "Double the rate," Marco replied, which immediately raised Elena's suspicions. They never paid more than they had to. "Why double?" she asked, her tone cautious but not accusatory. Marco leaned back, studying her. "Because this is important. Because we need someone we trust. Someone who doesn't ask too many questions. You've been reliable, Elena. People have noticed. This was it, the moment Sarah had been working toward. Greater trust meant greater access, but it also meant greater danger. If they were paying attention to her, she had to be even more careful. I'll have it done by tomorrow afternoon, Elena said, taking the folder.
Where do I deliver it? I'll text you the location. And Elena? Marco's expression hardened. No copies, no photos, no mistakes.
We're very clear about that. Elena nodded and left the cafe, her heart pounding beneath the calm exterior. As soon as she was clear, she pulled out her phone and sent a coded text to a secure number. Within minutes, Captain Reeves, monitoring her communications from the base, would receive the message and know she had obtained the documents. The challenge now was photographing every page without being detected, translating them to maintain her cover, and getting the intelligence back to the team. She had done this dozens of times, but the stakes had never felt higher. The documents Marco had given her would provide the final pieces of information needed to identify all the key players and locations for the upcoming operation. Working late into the night in her small apartment, Elena photographed each page using a specialized phone that automatically transmitted encrypted images to a secure server. Sarah's training kicked in. Perfect lighting, crisp images, multiple angles to ensure every detail was captured. Then she began the actual translation work, because Marco would check it, and it had to be flawless. At 3 a.m, she finished. The translations were perfect, the photographs sent, and now she just had to survive long enough to see the operation through. She lay down on the worn mattress in her apartment, but sleep wouldn't come. Her mind drifted back to the base, to the people who now knew who she really was. Did they understand what it was like, living like this? Probably not. How could they? They went home to their families, slept in their own beds, lived under their own names. Sarah Martinez felt like a distant memory, someone Elena had heard about but never met. The isolation pressed down on her like a physical weight. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marco. Warehouse on 5th Street. Noon tomorrow. Bring the documents. Elena responded simply. Okay? The next morning, she arrived at the warehouse early, the translated documents in a plain envelope. The building was exactly the kind of place the network favored. Industrial, lots of exits, easy to monitor who came and went. She waited outside, smoking a cigarette she didn't want, playing the part of someone who belonged in this world. Marco arrived with 2 other men Elena didn't recognize. One was older, maybe 50, with a sharp suit and sharper eyes. The other was younger, but carried himself with the confidence of someone dangerous. Her internal alarm system went on high alert. Elena! Good, Marco said, gesturing for her to follow them inside. Mr. Castillo wanted to meet you personally. The older man in the suit was Castillo. Sarah knew the name from her intelligence briefings. He was 3 levels up in the network, someone who rarely appeared in person. This meeting was either a very good sign or a very bad one. Inside the warehouse, several men were loading wooden crates into trucks. They barely glanced at Elena as she passed, which was both reassuring and standard. In this world, women doing clerical work were beneath notice. Castillo led them to a small office at the back of the warehouse. He sat behind a metal desk while Marco and the other man positioned themselves near the door. Elena stood in the middle of the room, acutely aware of how exposed she was. The translations, Castillo said, extending his hand. Elena handed him the envelope. He opened it slowly, reviewing the pages with careful attention. The silence stretched uncomfortably long. Finally, Castillo looked up. Your work is always precise, Elena. Marco tells me you're reliable. You don't ask questions. You don't cause problems. I just do my job, Elena replied, keeping her voice steady. Yes, exactly. Castillo set the documents down. That's why we have a new opportunity for you. Something more substantial than translation work. Something that would pay very well, but would require complete loyalty and discretion. This was unexpected. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities, calculating risks and potential intelligence value. What kind of opportunity? We need someone to coordinate communications between our operations in 3 cities. Someone smart, someone who can handle multiple languages, someone who knows how to stay invisible. Castillo leaned forward. Someone like you? Elena forced herself to appear thoughtful, rather than alarmed. This level of involvement would provide unprecedented access to the network's operations, but it would also make it nearly impossible to maintain her cover. She couldn't communicate regularly with her handlers without raising suspicion, and she would be under constant scrutiny. "That's a big responsibility," Elena said carefully. "I'm just a translator." "You're more than that," Castillo countered. "We've been watching you, Elena. You're smart, capable, and most importantly, you understand the value of silence. We don't offer this kind of position to just anyone." Marco jumped in. "It's a good opportunity, Elena. This kind of trust, it means protection. It means you're part of the family." Sarah knew what family meant in this context. Once you were in, getting out wasn't an option. If she accepted, she would be trapped, unable to extricate herself without blowing her cover and potentially endangering the entire operation. "I need to think about it," Elena said, buying time. "This is not something I expected." Castillo's expression hardened slightly. "We need an answer soon. The position needs to be filled within a week." "I understand. Can I have 3 days?" After a long pause, Castillo nodded. 3 days. "But Elena, understand this. We're extending this offer because we trust you. Don't make us regret that trust." The threat was clear. Elena nodded and left the warehouse as calmly as she could manage. But once she was several blocks away, she ducked into an alley and sent an emergency signal to her handlers. Within 20 minutes, her phone rang. "Martinez, what's your status?" It was General Chen's voice, urgent but controlled. "I've been offered a position inside the network. High-level coordination role. It's an intelligence goldmine, but it's also a trap. If I accept, I lose most of my mobility and communication capability. If I decline, I become suspicious." She could hear the general conferring with others in the background. When he came back on the line, his voice was decisive. "We move up the operation timeline. We can't risk losing you inside the network with no way to extract you." "How soon?" Elena asked, though she already knew the answer would be fast. 72 hours. The team is already in position. We've been monitoring the targets based on the intelligence you provided. We just needed final confirmation of the shipment route, which you got us yesterday. Now we move. Relief and anxiety flooded through Sarah in equal measure. "What do I need to do?" "Tell Castillo you accept the position. That will lower their guard. On the day of the operation, you need to be at the primary warehouse location by 8 a.m. We'll have units surrounding all target sites, but we need you inside to ensure we have eyes on the leadership." "Understood." "Sarah." The general's voice softened slightly. "You've done exceptional work. In 3 days, this will be over, and you can come home." The word felt foreign to Elena, but achingly familiar to Sarah. "I'll see you on the other side." The next 3 days were the longest of Sarah's life. She confirmed her acceptance of Castillo's offer, which was met with satisfaction and immediate demands on her time. She attended meetings, reviewed documents, and began coordinating communications between cells, all while secretly feeding information back to her team. Captain Reeves worked around the clock monitoring her transmissions, decoding her carefully crafted messages, and updating the tactical plans based on real-time intelligence. Major Williams positioned her teams at strategic locations around all target sites. Colonel Hawthorne coordinated with federal agencies to ensure simultaneous raids across 3 cities. On the morning of the operation, Elena arrived at the warehouse at 7:45. The building was bustling with activity. This was the day of the major shipment, and everyone was on edge, focused on ensuring everything went smoothly. Elena moved through the space, her presence barely acknowledged, which was exactly what she needed. At exactly 8 a.m., her phone buzzed with a single word: "Go." What happened next occurred with stunning precision. Federal agents and military personnel swarmed the building from all sides simultaneously. Similar raids were happening at 2 other locations across the city and in 2 other cities across the state. The coordination was perfect, the timing flawless. Inside the warehouse, Elena immediately moved to the back office where Castillo and other senior members were meeting. She had to ensure they didn't escape in the chaos. As agents burst through the doors, she positioned herself between the leadership and their escape route, her hand moving to the small weapon she had concealed in her jacket. "Nobody move!" Major Williams's voice rang through the warehouse as her tactical team secured the main floor. Castillo stared at Elena, realization dawning on his face. "You," he said, the word filled with venom and disbelief. "You're one of them." "Special Agent Sarah Martinez, Federal Intelligence," she replied, her voice no longer Elena's but her own. "You're under arrest for human trafficking, racketeering, and about 15 other charges I'm happy to list." The look of shock on Castillo's face was matched by Marco's and the others as they were taken into custody. They had so thoroughly dismissed Elena as a low-level nobody that the possibility of her being an agent had never crossed their minds. Within an hour, the warehouse was secured. Over 60 arrests were made across all locations, with evidence seized that would dismantle not just this network, but connected operations across multiple countries. Major Williams approached Sarah as she finally allowed herself to breathe. "Hell of a job, Martinez," the Major said with genuine admiration. "Your intelligence made this possible." "It was a team effort," Sarah replied, though she appreciated the recognition. "Everyone executed perfectly." General Chen arrived as the last of the suspects were being transported. He found Sarah sitting on a crate outside the warehouse, still in Elena's clothes, but with Sarah's bearing fully returned. He sat down beside her, saying nothing for a long moment.
How do you feel?
He finally asked, relieved, exhausted, a little lost, honestly. "I've been Elena for so long that being Sarah again feels strange. It will take time to readjust. We have counselors ready to help you through the transition." "I know, I've done this before, just never for this long." She looked at the general. "Did we get everyone we were after?" "All the primary targets are in custody, and we've recovered evidence that will lead to dozens of additional arrests. Conservative estimates suggest this operation will save hundreds of lives over the next year alone." She nodded, letting the weight of that sink in. "I couldn't have done it without the team. Knowing you were all out there watching my back, it made a difference. They learned something important working with you," General Chen said. "About assumptions, about underestimating people, about looking beyond the surface. Every single person on this operation will carry that lesson forward." As they sat there in the aftermath of the successful raid, Sarah thought about the journey that had brought her to this moment. From walking into that conference room and being dismissed as a lost rookie, to the hours of planning and preparation with people who learned to respect her capabilities, to the long months undercover as someone else entirely. It had been exhausting and isolating, but it had also been important. A few weeks later, Sarah found herself back at Fort Harrison for the debrief and recognition ceremony. She wore her dress uniform, something she rarely did anymore, with the medals she had earned over years of service. The officers she had worked with greeted her warmly, and this time, there was no confusion, no dismissal, no underestimation. Colonel Hawthorne approached her before the ceremony began. "I wanted to thank you personally, Agent Martinez, and to apologize one last time for that first meeting. I've thought a lot about my initial reaction to you, and I've made changes in how I evaluate personnel. You taught me a valuable lesson. We all make mistakes, Colonel. What matters is what we learn from them. I've been recommending you for a commendation," he continued. "What you did required not just courage, but extraordinary patience and discipline. You could have called us out that first day, could have demanded respect, but you didn't. That takes a special kind of strength." During the ceremony, General Chen presented Sarah with a Medal of Excellence for her work on the operation. As he placed the medal around her neck, he spoke to the assembled officers and personnel. "This recognition represents 18 months of sacrifice, danger, and unwavering commitment to a mission that saved countless lives. But it also represents something more fundamental about effective service." Agent Martinez succeeded not despite being underestimated, but in some ways because of it. She understood that real strength doesn't always need to announce itself, that competence speaks louder than demands for respect, and that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is let your work speak for itself. The applause that followed was thunderous, and Sarah felt the weight of the last 18 months finally lifting. She had done something important, something that mattered, and she had done it by being exactly who she was, even when that meant being invisible. After the ceremony, as people mingled and congratulated her, Sarah stepped outside for air. Major Williams joined her, 2 glasses of champagne in hand. "To underestimated women everywhere," Major Williams said, raising her glass. Sarah clinked her glass against it. "And to those who learn to see past their assumptions. Do you think you'll go back undercover again?" the Major asked. "After everything you've been through?" Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering. "I don't know. Part of me wants to take a break, to just be myself for a while without having to hide or pretend. But I also know this work is important and I'm good at it. People underestimating me has always been my greatest asset. You shouldn't have to rely on being underestimated to be effective." "No, I shouldn't," Sarah agreed. "But until the world changes, I'll use every tool I have to do good work and save lives. If that means letting people think I'm just a rookie until I prove otherwise, I can live with that." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over the base. Sarah thought about that first day, walking into the conference room and seeing the dismissal in everyone's eyes. She thought about the long months as Elena, the isolation and fear, the constant vigilance required to maintain her cover. And she thought about this moment, standing here as herself, recognized and respected, knowing she had made a real difference. The journey from rookie to respected agent hadn't been easy, but it had been worth it. Not just because of the mission's success, but because of what she had proven to herself and others. That assumptions are dangerous, that true capability comes in all forms, and that sometimes the person everyone underestimates is exactly the person who will surprise them most. As Sarah prepared to leave Fort Harrison, heading back to whatever assignment came next, she carried with her more than medals and commendations. She carried the knowledge that she had changed minds, challenged assumptions, and proven that being underestimated didn't make you weak. It made you underestimated. And in the right hands, that could be the most powerful weapon of all. The story of Sarah Martinez would be told in briefing rooms and training sessions for years to come, not just as a tale of a successful operation, but as a reminder that everyone who walks through the door deserves to be evaluated on their merit, not their appearance. That assumptions can be deadly, and that sometimes the most dangerous person in the room is the one nobody thought to take seriously. Sarah drove away from the base that afternoon with her real name, her real identity, and her real story intact. She had been underestimated, dismissed, and overlooked, but she had also been exceptional, capable, and ultimately victorious. And that made all the difference.